Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts, I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be concluding our two-part series on Judy Smith. Last week, we discussed some of the oddities leading up to her disappearance and ended with the discovery of her remains. Now, let's dive a little deeper into the time following Judy's recovery, as well as some of the theories surrounding what may have happened in the days, weeks, or months leading up to her death. Today's case is part 2 of the disappearance and death of Judy Smith. Last week, we ended the episode discussing the fact that Judy's remains had been discovered in a remote area in Asheville, North Carolina, which was located in Buncombe County on September 7, 1997. The area where her remains were found was actually within the Pisgah National Forest. It was stated that her skeletal remains were found, quote, near a campsite in the Smoky Mountains just off the Blue Ridge Parkway, end quote. The location where she was found was literally over 600 miles away from Philadelphia, where she'd been last seen, which equates to a nearly 10-hour drive. For weeks, though, nothing was reported on outside of the fact that unidentified remains had been found in the area. But in terms of identifying said remains, it had taken weeks to be able to do so because no one knew who she was. She was later identified via dental records, but that wasn't confirmed until September 30th. At first, because of the fact that no one knew who she was, and I don't believe any sort of ID to identify her was on her person, she was most likely categorized as a Jane Doe. However, what paid off and helped actually get authorities in North Carolina to use Judy's dental records to identify her were those flyers Jeff had mailed out back in May. I had mentioned that he'd sent them out to hospitals and medical examiners' offices, and it was supposedly a doctor who recognized the similarities in the remains found and the flyer he'd received. It's reported in the Philadelphia Inquirer that, quote, a doctor spotted a story in a local newspaper about an unidentified body being found and remembered that he had seen a flyer about Judith Smith, end quote. Truly, who knows if she would have still been a Jane Doe today if those flyers hadn't reached the right people.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah, what are the odds? How crazy that this guy, recognized that this could potentially be the same person and that he reached out to authorities.
Yeah.
All right, so now, as we move forward, I want to start by going over the scene where Judy's skeletal remains were found and what was discovered there. She'd been found in a t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, but I did also see it mentioned that she may have been wearing hiking boots, not necessarily those sneakers, so I don't know which is more accurate. But what's really weird is that also found with her was a blue backpack, not the red one she was last seen with. Which I think is huge because her trusty red backpack, the thing she took everywhere, I mean, why wouldn't it be with her? And I don't actually think that it was ever found in this area, or honestly ever found at all for that matter. So I'm not sure whatever happened to the Red Wonder.
That's odd. I'm still wondering how she ended up 600 miles away from the hotel.
I think that's what everybody's thinking, so...
I mean, I don't think it's odd that she was wearing potentially hiking boots and that she was in this forested area because... You know, that's what she did. She liked to hike. She liked to do these things. So
exactly. It's very like her.
It's not out of place for her to be somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
But where's her trusty backpack? How did she end up here?
Yep.
If they're skeletal remains, clearly she had been deceased for some time now.
Yep.
By what means she was either killed or, died to exposure if it was out in cold weather or something,
Yeah, okay.
So if she's in a camp area, obviously right off of a main highway.
She's in a national forest.
Okay.
So she's in the wilderness. This is not off the side of the road. This is you had to hike there to get here.
Okay.
So anyway, back to the backpack. There were items in it that were described as warmer clothes, which led authorities to believe that Judy had died pretty much right after she'd gone missing because of the cold weather in the springtime. It was reported that it was around 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit in that area back in April when she went missing. So her having warmer clothes wouldn't have been very surprising.
Can we just go over the timeline again really quick?
Sure.
So she arrived in Philadelphia when?
April 9th.
So April 9th of 97.
Correct.
And then she was found September 7th of 97.
Yes, so she went missing April 10th. Remains were found on September 7th, and they were identified on September 30th.
Okay.
Authorities also located $167 in cash within Judy's belongings, a flashlight, and a mystery novel entitled Flashback, which was written by Michael Palmer.
Have you looked up that book yet?
No.
My Little Bookworm?
No, I didn't, but I was like, Judy loved the same kind of books that I did.
Yeah.
So. Also, I just stated that it was believed that Judy had died in the springtime. But once the scene was analyzed a bit more, authorities were under the impression that Judy had in fact been killed. Not that she died by the elements or an animal attack or anything along those lines. Judy's case was now classified as a homicide. It seems as though the number one thing that led authorities to that belief was that her body had actually been buried. And there were also additional clues found at the scene that made investigators believe that she may have even been dragged to where her body was later found in that grave. And I believe it may have taken so long for her body to actually even become discoverable because she had in fact been fully buried, where you wouldn't have been able to see anything. But this grave was shallow and it had been partially dug up by animals, with some of her remains even being found within a 100-yard diameter in the area due to this animal activity.
That's what I would have assumed if you said that she had been buried, but now she was discoverable.
Yeah.
You'd have to guess that some type of predator or some type of animal would have started to dig it up.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So when the hunters came across it, it was obvious at that point that there were remains there, but before the animals got to it, no one would have even known, so I assume it probably just looked like an abandoned campsite.
Yeah, potentially. And I mean, if these people were hunters, the ones that found them, they could have been trackers. They could have been tracking animals that were going through the area.
Yep.
And it just so happened that those tracks were leading them to the body because maybe the animal they were tracking, was looking for food or whatever, as morbid as that sounds.
Yep.
They had stumbled upon her body and,
Yeah. Also, authorities were under the impression that Judy was killed in the area where she was found rather than somewhere else and then later brought to this location because the terrain was super difficult to get through, and whoever killed her, if they had, moved her, would have had to have been in tip-top physical shape to have moved her from anywhere else to this area. Plus, the campsite was already set up. It was like she had been there, her stuff was there, so they were under the impression for sure she was killed at this campsite and buried in the same place.
So you're saying it's just not feasible that she would have been killed somewhere else and moved to this location?
Exactly. It didn't seem possible at all. Something else interesting I saw reported was that none of Judy's jewelry that she regularly wore was on her person, including her brand new engagement ring and wedding band. But they did find the money with her, so robbery was ruled out pretty quickly as a motive. However, I do just want to say that I did see it mentioned in the Unsolved Mysteries episode on this case that Judy did have her engagement ring on her, so I'm not entirely sure which is most accurate, which seems to be becoming a common thing for me to say in this episode. But regardless, money was left there and not taken, so I still think ruling out robbery makes sense here.
But yeah, with money still being there, that's something I was going to ask. Did they find her ring on her? Did they find her jewelry on her?
Now, after the autopsy was completed, the ME was unable to determine Judy's cause of death right away due to the extreme state of decomposition. Like we've said, her body was pretty much just skeletal remains at this point, which made it far more difficult to pinpoint anything. However, it was reported that authorities were going to be doing some additional testing to see if they could come up with a more concrete cause of death at a later date. So now, at this point, due to the fact that this was considered a homicide and Judy had gone missing from Pennsylvania but was found in North Carolina, both Philadelphia PD and the Buncombe County PD were involved in the investigation into both her disappearance and subsequent murder. In terms of where investigators' heads were at now, even though Judy had been murdered, they still weren't ruling out the idea that she could have decided to up and leave of her own volition, and then somehow she came across the wrong person who ended up killing her while she was trying to start this new life elsewhere.
Could she have met up with someone? Like if she had gone to up and leave her life, did she have somebody else that she had been talking to? And, she went to North Carolina to meet up with this person, and then this person wasn't who she thought it would be?
Definitely a possibility. But there's another thing that made authorities believe that she could have made the decision to leave on her own, and that's because of where her body was found. Like you were saying before, John, she was found in a national forest. She was outdoors. This was a place that she would normally frequent. We've talked about it over and over. So authorities weren't going to let that idea pass them by. The Buncombe County Sheriff, Bob Medford, told the Philadelphia Inquirer, quote, "The indications are she wanted to be there," end quote. And just based on that statement, it sure seems as though investigators were working off the theory that Judy chose to make the trip down to North Carolina herself and was unfortunately killed while she was down there. Philadelphia PD seemed to agree, with Captain John McGinnis telling the Philadelphia Inquirer, quote, "Based on what they've got, they don't think she was taken from here involuntarily, and I would agree," end quote. Locals were also spoken to regarding the area where Judy's remains were found. One local stated the following, quote, "People that own summer homes here come from all over, and there are so many people on drugs and in cults that you never know. I certainly wouldn't let my wife or any other lady walk in those woods alone," end quote.
Damn.
Right?
That's a hell of a quote.
It definitely is.
Cults, people on drugs.
Yeah.
All in a national forest?
Yeah, so I was thinking along the lines, like if Judy decided to go here herself, she might not have known about any of these potential dangers, like if she's headed here alone. So could she have unfortunately stumbled upon some like monster?
Was this just something somebody was saying, like, with no factual basis to be, making claims about, people on drugs, people in cults? Was this like a common area where people would disappear from or be murdered in?
There are definitely predators who pick that area for a reason.
Right, but it's just weird. Like, why would this person say that?
Well, they're a local. They lived nearby in one of the towns nearby, and they were living there at the time, and they're like, I wouldn't go there. This is why I don't like this area. And a bunch of other people had been interviewed as well, and they were all saying kind of, things along the same lines, that like this wasn't a safe place for someone to be alone.
And here I was saying that Philadelphia, you had all these gangs in the area at the time, and it's a big city. A lot of things can happen. Mm-hmm. And here she is found allegedly murdered in the middle of nature.
Yep, exactly. So that's what I said. That
quite the twist.
Oh, for sure. And that's what I was saying about this case before, where it's like you have these certain thoughts and you think a certain way, and then like you find out something else and you're like, shit. And then you find out something else and you're like, what is going on here? And then, I kind of feel like all of your thoughts on everything kind of unravel, and then you have to piece them all back together at the end.
Yeah, the crux of this, like the question that I have is, how did she get to North Carolina?
I think that's the number one question for everybody.
Hey, who was the person on Uncovered that you had just told me about? You commented on their introduction post where they said,
where they wanted to know why that person was in the place that they were before they went missing.
Right.
She definitely had a good question there. And I'm like, That is something I'd probably want to know in every case we've ever covered.
Right. And in this one in particular,
absolutely.
I mean, like we talk about this one a lot because it's relatively recent, but John William Leonard Sr., we know why he was there.
Yes.
He got a fare to go there. But like this one, Judy was just in Philadelphia with her husband on this trip for his conference, and then she disappears, and now she's 600 miles away in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. How? Why? With who?
Yep. Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Lots of questions. So this same local guy that gave the quote regarding the people on drugs and the cults and all of that, he also said that it would be odd and kind of difficult to find the spot where Judy was found. It wasn't like a you just stumble upon it type of place. He stated, quote, "Let's just say it's highly unlikely that she'd end up here unless she or someone with her had knowledge of the area," end quote. Her family, on the other hand, had no clue why Judy would have ever left or why she would have gone down to North Carolina in the first place. And again, I don't know how many times we're going to say this either. This is 600 miles south of Philadelphia. This is a 10-hour drive. This is a long distance.
Maybe she found somebody in a, it'd be interesting to know if she had a computer and stuff like that, but maybe she found somebody in a chat room.
It's so interesting you say that. You should be best friends with all the people on Reddit and Web Sleuths, because this is something that's definitely come up in speculation. Well,
I mean, think about how I won't say we because
I was a wee little lass in 97.
Right, but when you think about early ages of the internet, how chat rooms were a thing, everybody gave all their information out there.
Oh my God, yeah.
Do you know ASL?
Oh yeah, I do. Age, sex, location.
Yeah, I was going to say not sign language.
No, no, I knew exactly what you meant in terms of AOL.
So maybe she had found somebody online.
Yeah, maybe she met someone, and a lot of people were so much more trusting with
that's
people
what I'm saying.
online
They put all their information out there. They would build these friendships and stuff. And
yeah.
maybe she met somebody from North Carolina. They were like, oh, yeah, come down.
Maybe someone catfished her.
Catfished her, or maybe they were a predator and they were ahead of the times.
Yeah.
And they were utilizing the internet to bring people to them, or at least trying to
lure people. Yeah.
To lure people. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's weird that if her family has no idea why she would be down there, her kids especially.
Yeah.
More so than Jeff. But.
Yeah. Well, even though it was stated that she had no ties to North Carolina, she had apparently traveled there a few years prior with Jeff, but when they went together, it was Raleigh that they visited. The distance between the two cities, Raleigh, where she previously visited, and Asheville, where her remains were found, are over 250 miles apart, or a 4-hour drive. So it's not like she'd been to this area specifically before and was like, oh, I want to go back here because it's beautiful, you know?
No, I would be more inclined to believe that she found somebody that claimed to have a similar passion of hiking and traveling, and she had maybe built some type of relationship with them over the internet, maybe.
Yeah.
And if she did indeed make the decision to up and leave and run away, maybe it was only going to be for a short period of time to meet this person.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever transpired with this person potentially killing her, maybe that's why her kids had no idea about it, because she was only planning to go meet this person for a little while.
Yeah.
Then she was going to end up coming back, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Give whatever reason for leaving.
Right. If investigators are saying that she was killed when she disappeared, there wouldn't have been any time period for her to meet this person, go on the hiking trip that they had planned, and then reach out to her children. So that could be why.
I think it's interesting so far with how you're kind of reacting to this, because I'm very surprised that you haven't mentioned anything about Jeff and his potential involvement. You thought he was a little sketchy before, but now you're kind of thinking along the lines that, like, somebody else is involved in her murder.
Well, reason being is that we know that he was at the conference. Then we know that Judy's children came down to assist in the Philadelphia area looking for her. Then I thought you had said that they all traveled back to Massachusetts together.
They did.
So, without some wrench being thrown in here, it seems like his whereabouts are accounted for to the extent of he wouldn't be able to travel 600 miles away to kill his wife and dispose of her body.
I was just curious in general that you wouldn't even, like, so far already in this episode, however far we are into this, like, you hadn't even mentioned Jeff and thinking that he could have had any involvement. So I think everything that we talked about in last week's episode almost got thrown out the window once we heard that she was 600 miles away.
I don't think everything from the first episode
a lot
was thrown out. So you talk about part one. I mean, in part one, we know that there was a rocky relationship in the marriage. Some friends of Judy's had said that, you know, she had been stashing money away. I think where we kind of left off with the last week, I was moving more away from Jeff being involved and going more in line with maybe she had ran away.
I agree, yeah.
And then maybe some type of Vicky Lee Lamberton type thing where planned to run away, then something bad happened.
Yeah.
That's where I was going. I thought that, you know, we could account for most of Jeff's whereabouts. I guess it kind of did get thrown out from last week.
All right. Well,
I'm more in the lines of thinking that maybe there was an online relationship. She met somebody. She went to meet up with somebody that had a similar interest as her.
But 5 months into her marriage, that's a little rough.
I mean, they were together for 10 years.
That's true.
So 5 months of marriage is one thing.
Compared to a decade long of being together.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. Well, at this point, with little to go on, anyone and everyone was a suspect, and that did include Jeff Smith. Authorities were definitely eyeing him earlier on in the investigation, especially when they were looking into the idea of Judy not ever being in Philly, but they hadn't named him as a suspect in his wife's disappearance, and they actually still hadn't after her body had been discovered. I mean, obviously, I know I said, like, anyone and everyone is a suspect, but, you know, no one's actually named one officially, but police are like, I'm going to eye you, and I'm going to eye you, and I'm going to eye you. So it's like all these people are in the back of their minds, more likely probably a person of interest than a legitimate suspect, but Jeff is on that list.
Yeah, or even teetering on a person of interest.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way that, like, they can completely rule him out yet, at least in their minds.
Right, because until the very end of last week's episode, we didn't even know where she was. So there was really no crime afoot at that point.
Yes, exactly.
But then once you find that she's dead, now you need to figure out, you know, was she killed? Did she die some other way?
Yep.
And then now you're looking into a crime occurring.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Well, once Judy's body had been discovered and Jeff was made aware of that, his spokesperson, Sally Jackson, made a statement for him. She stated, quote, "He's been living in a state of hope and despair, and hope just got yanked away," end quote. Even though authorities had an eye on Jeff, those close to him didn't believe there was any way he could have been involved in his wife's murder. His law firm partner stated, quote, "Jeff himself put an extraordinary effort from the day his wife was missing to until the day he found out she had been found. He did everything humanly possible in terms of time, effort, and expense," end quote.
I will be shocked if more evidence comes out that shows that Jeff was involved, unless he was involved, maybe like monetarily or creating some type of scheme there. I just feel like the timeline is too tight to say that he was physically involved in the death of his wife.
I agree. Well, I had also mentioned before that Jeff had wanted the FBI to get involved, but at first it didn't seem like they would, or it didn't seem like Philly PD would call them in. But now that this case has crossed state lines and Judy was found in a national forest, I think that might have changed things. It was reported in the Gettysburg Times that the FBI was considering getting involved in the case after Judy's remains were discovered, which made me wonder if they aren't required to get involved, even if a case crosses state lines, like I mentioned earlier on when Judy was just considered a missing person. Well, that was kind of clarified by an article in the Philadelphia City paper. The article discussed what an FBI spokeswoman said, quote, "We can only get involved when there's a violent crime and when the police would need our assistance for specific reasons, like following up leads in another jurisdiction," end quote. So what she said there kind of makes me think, okay, well, there's leads in another jurisdiction, aren't there?
Well, yeah, I would say so. I mean, now you have technically 3 states, but I would say 2 that are directly involved. You have Pennsylvania and you have North Carolina now. And then any states that she may have traveled through on the way.
Yeah, exactly.
So you are talking, anywhere from 2 to 3 to 7 states.
Yeah, well, and she was also supposedly seen in New Jersey, so she's been in multiple other states. But I think the question behind did the FBI get involved, will they get involved, this whole thing has to do with the fact that they don't know if she was in all these states willingly. Because if she wasn't kidnapped, if she wasn't held against her will, crossing state lines doesn't technically matter because she's making the decision. Right,
the only crime that occurred was the one in North Carolina.
Technically, yes, unless
she was taken
more
against her
evidence
will.
came out that she was abducted, so who knows?
Right. Or unless, I know that this would be in its infancy at the time, some type of cybercrime where somebody had catfished her.
Yep.
So then she was in her home state during the time, so you would have to have a subpoena for any internet records from that area. So then you are talking multiple jurisdictions at that point because you're talking, a death in North Carolina, information for the investigation in Massachusetts, where any phone calls made between the 2 individuals, if this is the route that it went, while she was in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
So there are, I think, still multiple jurisdictions involved.
Yeah.
It's just hard to narrow down how.
Yeah, I agree completely. In terms of who authorities believed could have murdered Judy, there was a bit of information that kind of threw a wrench in the theory that Jeff could have physically had something to do with Judy's murder, just based on this next statement.
You don't say.
Quote, "Investigators said they doubt whether Jeffrey Smith, an overweight man who easily becomes short of breath, could negotiate the mountainous terrain," end quote. The Buncombe County Sheriff Bobby Medford also stated, quote, "He couldn't have done this by himself because he's apparently not in good health. Right now, he's no more of a suspect than anybody else," end quote.
So you're going to send me a picture of him then?
Yes, here you go.
Okay. Yes, I do not think this guy would be trekking through the wilderness attempting to bury a body.
Yeah, and honestly, oh my God, when I was reading some of these articles, though, there is a nice way to put this where people were saying in these quotes, he was an overweight man, he was not in good health. Some people were like, he was so portly, he's morbidly obese, he couldn't do this. And I was like, damn, you guys are mean.
I mean, true.
Yes, he is a very heavy-set man, but I was like, holy crap, how would you feel?
I know, I would say, hey, there's my alibi, so stop looking at me.
It is true. But I think the interesting thing, though, in one of these quotes, which was from Bobby Medford, where he said he couldn't have done this by himself, I thought was a little bit interesting.
I didn't think he was involved physically before because the timeline was just too tight there.
Absolutely, yeah.
After seeing a photo of him, I really don't think he was physically involved.
Agreed.
even if there was an additional person with him, I don't see this guy hiking through the wilderness at all. Like, even if it was him and somebody else along with Judy.
I think maybe they were talking along the lines of, like, he hired somebody.
That's the only way I would think of, and that's what I was alluding to earlier, was if he had hired somebody or something. But still.
Yeah, I don't see it as possible. I am just of the mindset, like, I really do not think Jeff was involved in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that authorities would even, like, still consider him. Like, I get that you have to consider him, but it's like every possible indicator is pointing away from him. It's like all the arrows are, like, literally pointing in every other possible direction other than Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things you would want to establish in regards to Jeff being involved would be motive.
Yeah.
Judy appeared to be the one that was apprehensive about getting married. He had her sign a prenup. What would he have gained to have married this lady and then 5 months later have her murdered?
Absolutely nothing, unless she had life insurance, but I heard nothing about that, so...
Well, if he had a prenup, I'm sure he was well off enough that he wouldn't have needed life insurance from Judy.
Yeah, I agree completely with that.
So,
if we're working with the idea that Jeff did not do this, what other options were there? Again, this goes back to what I said earlier about how she wouldn't have been taken by someone without causing a scene. Her friends and family said that they did not think Judy could have been abducted while sightseeing in Philadelphia because she was, quote, assertive and resourceful. But you also never know how anyone is going to react in a situation like that. You could be the most outspoken, loud, assertive person in the world, and someone could come up to you with a gun to your back, and you might just completely freeze and panic and not know how to react. But then if we go back to what authorities said earlier about how they believed Judy wanted to be where she was in North Carolina, then again, that throws the whole abduction theory out the window too. So basically what I'm trying to say is I am confused and I don't know where I land on this case, and that's kind of where I'm at, other than like what you were saying regarding the fact that like maybe this was her meeting up with someone on the internet.
So as far as the abduction portion goes, anybody can be caught off guard at any time. So to say that she was assertive and resourceful, that, you know, she probably would have made a scene if she had been abducted. I know it's like a movie trope or TV thing where, you know, somebody has chloroform on a rag and, you know, puts it up to your mouth and your nose and knocks you out. Could have happened. I mean, all of those things are
real life things.
Real life occurrences. That's why they're wrote into fiction. So, but I think that if I had to, you know, narrow down, was she abducted? Was she taken against her will? I think no, I'm more in the camp of believing that she was there because she wanted to be there. And if we're trying to come up with a reason why she was there, and if it didn't have to do with Jeff, it has to fall in line with that she was trying to, you know, leave or start some type of new relationship with someone. Where would she have met them? Could she have met somebody on the internet and then went to meet them and they weren't who they said they were?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of really the only thing that seems remotely possible to me right now. But
without more information, I think that's where I would lean. And
yeah.
I know a lot of times when we talk about theories and, you know, could-haves, would-haves, they got to be grounded in some type of reality where there's evidence that would bring you to that conclusion. But right now we have, you know, a couple people saying that this lady wasn't super happy in her marriage, that she might have been stashing cash. Then we have her in Philadelphia and then she just disappears. That's enough evidence to guess that she may have been trying to go somewhere else.
I agree.
Or run away, or at least meet up with somebody for a short amount of time. And because things went bad, she wasn't afforded the opportunity to call her kids and to tell them about it, because if she had let them know ahead of time, they would probably would have talked her out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And been like, no, what the fuck are you doing? Don't do that. Blah, blah, blah. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep moving forward. So after Judy's body had been discovered and then identified in late September 1997, authorities in North Carolina were planning to travel up to Philadelphia to work through kind of where Judy could have gone while sightseeing, and they were even planning to stay in the same hotel that the Smiths had stayed in, and they were going to canvass the area and just overall retrace her steps to see if they could find anything that may have placed her there or that would lead them to how or why she obviously made her way down to North Carolina after she disappeared. It's also reported that investigators planned a trip to Boston as well so they could speak to Jeff Smith. Well, once authorities spoke to Jeff, they asked him to take a polygraph test. And there was this article that I found in the Philadelphia Daily News that had the most bizarre headline, and I just had to tell you about it. It's titled, quote, "Slain Tourist's Mate to Agree to Lie Test," end quote.
What?
What a bizarre way to title an article.
That's very strange. It sounds like somebody that, you know, is just clicks weren't really a thing back then, but
that's like, I'm going to read that. Like,
right, they're writing a title for clicks. It's like clickbait.
Yeah, I just thought it was like the literal strangest title I've ever seen.
Right,
in a case so far. I'm like, what?
It's more like
it's for shock value. That's what that sounds like.
Right, husband of missing woman agrees to take polygraph test.
Yeah, but it's like a more fucked up way of saying it.
Right.
But anyway, even if authorities believed Jeff couldn't physically have done anything to harm Judy, were they now thinking that he could have hired somebody to do it, and that's why they wanted him to take a polygraph? Again, we were just saying that it seems like all arrows are pointing away from Jeff, so like, is this standard procedure? What's the point? What are they thinking? It's just weird.
Yeah, I mean, they could have been leaning on polygraph tests a lot more back in the day before technology was greater than it was, because it was a way to ask people questions and try to catch them in lies.
Yeah.
Whereas now, you'd have a lot more surveillance footage. You'd have a greater ability to track people and their movements.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was probably standard operating procedure. Maybe they wanted to ask him questions about the state of his marriage.
Maybe, yeah, to see if he was, not being overly truthful there.
Or to see if she had been taking part in an affair, or if there was any infidelity in that respect.
Yeah.
Maybe just to kind of get a deeper insight into their marriage.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. But the FBI, who Jeff wanted involved from the very start, was who would supposedly be administering the polygraph. It's unclear exactly when he would be taking the test, though. It was also reported that, I guess, much earlier on, like literally back in April when Judy had first gone missing, Jeff had even asked the Philadelphia PD if he could take a lie detector test, but when they offered it to him, he only agreed to take it if the FBI became involved in the case. And like I mentioned before, investigators weren't planning to bring the FBI in. And from there, Jeff declined taking the test because it would have been administered by Philadelphia PD directly. I don't know why he wouldn't have been comfortable with them administering it outside of the bad taste in his mouth Jeff seemed to have for them from the very start. But then there's comments in other publications about how Jeff supposedly refused a polygraph in general.
Meaning not from the Philadelphia PD, but like from the FBI originally, and then he was forced to take it?
No, so let me just read this to you. So it's in the Philadelphia City paper, and it reported that even though Jeff was adamant he never refused the polygraph test, authorities were stating otherwise. The article stated, quote, "He refused," says Deputy Police Commissioner Richard Zappiel. "Certain conditions were met, but as far as I'm concerned, he refused." McGinnis says Smith already knew the FBI would not join the investigation when he made that a condition for taking the polygraph, and that Philadelphia police arranged for Massachusetts State Police to administer the test. "We asked him, he said no. That's a refusal no matter how you word it," McGinnis says. "He is a lawyer. I'm sure he's very good with words, but the bottom line is he was asked to take one and he didn't take one," end quote.
Yeah, I think that's police mincing
chatter.
Words. No, that's like, yeah, we offered to provide a polygraph test, but he declined. It's like when he was saying, hey, I will take a polygraph test, but you need to get the FBI in here.
Yeah.
It's like a tit for tat, It's like, I'll do it, but I want you to get the FBI here. So when they're like, no, we'll just give it to you. And he said, no, it's not him being approached and refusing it. It's like he put it on the table, but he wants greater resources to be brought in to try and help figure out what the fuck's going on.
Yep, exactly.
So I think that whoever gave that statement was just salty about the whole situation.
Seems like it.
And was spinning it in his own benefit.
Yes, and the thing that I did want to mention too was in some articles it seemed as though Philadelphia PD was going to be administering the test, and that's what I had stated before. And then in this quote it said that they stated, like Philadelphia PD stated that they were going to bring in the Massachusetts police to administer the polygraph. So like, which is accurate? Was it going to be Philadelphia? Was it going to be Massachusetts? Why would Jeff then decline it if it supposedly wasn't going to be Philly? Like, there seems to be a lot of like back and forth here, like you were just saying.
Yeah, I think that there's been a miscommunication somewhere in one of those articles, because if Judy went missing from Philadelphia, why would Massachusetts be involved at all?
Because he was now in Mass.
I understand that, but you have a woman that went missing. If she was confirmed last seen in Philadelphia, that's what you're going off of.
Yeah, like
because
why
she didn't
would
go missing from
Massachusetts be involved?
No. If anything, they would say, hey, you got to come back to Philly or we're going to travel to you and we're going to administer it. If you're starting to have, Massachusetts State Police administering a polygraph for
a crime that
Pennsylvania
may
State
have
Police,
occurred somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's time to bring in a greater agency, which may have been when they, brought in the FBI to do it.
Yeah, well, it seems then like that's maybe why Jeff was like, no, I want this greater agency because you guys are all over the place. He already had that whole situation with the NCIC. Now he's having this with the polygraph. It seemed like they might just not have liked Jeff. And like,
Maybe.
That's why they were eyeing him. And I kind of feel bad for the guy, like as we keep going throughout this. And I'm like, just more and more stuff keeps coming up where it's like, geez, they just really wanted to like nail him. And
well, you want to know why? You want to know why Philadelphia didn't like him?
Yeah.
Was because he reported it.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, all right, well, she'll probably come back. It's a big city, blah, blah, blah. Didn't really take it seriously. And then he went above them, told his buddy, who then told the mayor, and then the wrath came down from above. So they probably got their ass chewed out for not doing it in the first place.
I bet.
So then they were like, oh, you know what? Fuck this guy.
Yeah, I can see it. And the thing that sucks is, like, I can't tell if Jeff actually ever ended up taking the polygraph. And if he ever did, I really don't know if he passed it or not. But if I had to guess, based on what we know, it seems like he might not have.
Might not have passed the polygraph?
No, he might not have taken it in general, so.
Yeah, I mean, we had asked before, what would they gain from it?
Doesn't seem like much, other than, like, maybe.
Insight into their personal life.
Yeah.
If they were really trying to hammer down, did he hire somebody to kill his wife?
Yeah. I mean, maybe. But again, it just seems like it's a waste of time.
Yeah, I think it's a waste of time. And I think it really comes down to the fact that, at least I believe, and I think you do too, that Judy was down in North Carolina because she wanted to be down there.
Yeah. And I think that's just hard for me to grasp, though, because it's like, why would she leave her kids like that? Like, that's so tough. But then with your whole thing about if she met someone and it was just like going to be a day or two thing and then she'd call her kids and then this happened, that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Just to like up and leave in the middle of this conference. Why didn't you leave from Boston? Like, these are all the things that just keep swirling through my brain as we keep going. And it's like, I don't know what I believe.
Yeah, to disappear in the middle of this conference or this stay in Philadelphia with Jeff, it's strange, but I do think that the reason her kids didn't know about it could have been because, she had some type of extramarital affair that she had started, and then when she met up with this other person, things could have turned bad.
Yeah.
That's what seems to make the most sense to me. Obviously, she wouldn't have went there if she thought she was going to get murdered.
Yeah.
So she didn't want to tell her kids because her kids would have probably
tried to dissuade her from...
Yeah, try to dissuade her from doing it. And then, unfortunately, things happened the way they did, and she was never able to tell them.
Yeah.
Or she never came back from it. So that's why they didn't know.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate every which way you look at it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so as we move forward, a few years would go by before anything new was reported on in Judy's case. But in 2001, the Unsolved Mysteries episode that I've referenced a few times already aired. Jeff appeared in the episode, as did Judy's daughter, Amy. I'd say there were definitely some big things that came out of this episode. First and foremost, Judy's cause of death was revealed. Now, it wasn't 100% definitive, but it was believed that Judy had been stabbed to death. And the main reason that was believed to be true was because there were cut marks found on her bra, which then led the ME to believe stabbing could have been her cause of death.
So as far as the cause of death goes, if they had stab marks or cut marks through her bra, were there no marks on her ribs or any of the bones? Like, you'd think if somebody stabs you in the chest and it's a large enough knife, I mean, it doesn't even have to be a large knife. It could be a 3-inch knife and you could hit rib.
Yeah, I don't know.
And cause a marking.
I mean, clearly based on the initial autopsy, they didn't find that.
It's strange that they're coming to the conclusion that it was, death by stab wound when all they have are cut marks on a bra.
Yeah, but something else I felt was particularly interesting that was stated in this episode had to do with some additional sightings of Judy. Before, we had discussed how there were some sightings in Philadelphia that turned out to be someone that supposedly looked just like Judy but wasn't actually her. And then there was the one in New Jersey and a few others. Well, now that it's known that Judy was murdered and her body was found in North Carolina, there were actually sightings reported from the Asheville, North Carolina area, which was nearby to where her remains were located. Apparently, there were up to 4 eyewitnesses from this area, but there's one in particular that is interviewed for the Unsolved Mysteries episode, and her name was Joanne Stucker. She was a clerk at a store in the Asheville area, and she'd allegedly seen Judy in her store just days after she'd disappeared from Philadelphia. Joanne told the producers of Unsolved Mysteries, quote, "She seemed very alert to me. She was very pleasant. I didn't see anything about her that would indicate that she wasn't right in any way. She told me her husband was an attorney and that they were from Boston, and that they had been in Pennsylvania and he was at a convention, and she had decided to come down here," end quote. At first glance, the thing that makes her sighting seem so promising is the fact that she gave information she shouldn't have otherwise known, like the fact that they were from Boston, her husband was a lawyer, they were at a conference in Philly. Unless, of course, she saw it in the news before she came forward to authorities. I'm not saying she's making anything up, but if this stuff was reported in the media, it's hard to definitively hang your hat on this sighting, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and to remember all those specific things about this person. But I think that unless you can prove that this lady knew this information before she came forward to the police because of news reports, you kind of got to take some of it as honest.
Yeah, I just think, like, how would you know all these details that very clearly were in the news? They were in the news as of July of 1997. And then her remains were not found until September, and nothing was reported on it until very early in October because she wasn't actually identified until September 30th. So you've got like 3 months of this information being in the news, and now this episode didn't air until 2001, so who knows when the producers even started considering to do her episode. It's years into the investigation at that point.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she's lying. I'm not saying she's making it up. I'm not saying that she saw it in the news, but this was a very highly publicized case.
Right, and there's the possibility where if you come forward and you say, oh, I have information, then you get yourself on Unsolved Mysteries.
I mean, people do it all the time.
It's not outlandish to think that.
No, it's not. So it's like you have to take all of these little things with a grain of salt. It's like what I was saying before about the potential hearsay of the friends saying, you know, that the marriage could have been, you know, on the rocks or things like that. Usually, the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
What about the other sightings, though? Those are from the same area?
Yeah, there wasn't really, like, she was the main one that was interviewed and, like, talked about, but it said there were multiple other sightings. I am not exactly sure where they were, what they were. Like, this was the big one to say, like, she was seen in this store just days after she went missing. I think.
Like a hiking store?
No, it was like a knick-knack store. Sold, like, Christmas stuff and probably touristy type stuff and things like that.
Okay.
A friend of Judy's was also interviewed for the show, and she explained that she believed the Smiths' marriage was, quote, tenuous, and she thought something must have happened at home between Jeff and Judy that made her want to leave her marriage and her life behind, and that's actually what prompted her to leave her ID at home in the first place.
Purposefully, like I had thought.
Yes. However, Judy's daughter Amy stated in the episode that she believed her mother and Jeff had a great relationship and that her mother seemed to be very happy.
I don't know. I mean, if they didn't live with the kids, you don't know if a mother would want to be telling her kids about all the problems she's having.
Yes, I agree with that completely. A healthy familial relationship keeps those things, you know, kind of to themselves.
Right.
Where it's like, you're not going to talk to your kid about money issues.
Right.
Be like, oh my God, we're in so much debt. Why would you say that to your kid? Those are things that you keep between like you and your spouse or you and your friends.
Or you and your friends. Right. It's like when you see your kids, you want to have like a happy time. You want to have a good time with them. You don't want to be talking about all the problems that you have in your marriage after a 10-year relationship, 5 months of marriage. It's like...
Do you really want to say like, oh, me and Jeff are having problems to your daughter who like just experienced your wedding and sees how happy you were and now all of a sudden you're having these problems? I mean, I don't think that a lot of parents would tell their kids that.
No, I would think that a friend would have more insight into the ongoings of a marriage than adult children that don't live in the home anymore.
I agree, yeah. There was also one other comment from that friend that I mentioned before, which made me think that Judy definitely could have just unfortunately run into the wrong person and trusted them more than she should have. She said that Judy believed everyone to be a good person, and that made her vulnerable, which I can totally agree with. If you aren't skeptical about people and their potential reasoning for getting involved with you, you could be putting yourself in danger. Not that this is like a flaw for Judy to have. It's honestly probably a good thing to be able to see the good in people. But I feel like from my experience, all of these cases that I've researched, I think that sometimes we as humans kind of just put too much faith into others and then they turn out to be monsters or pieces of garbage.
Yeah, I mean, if you're always looking at the positive and you always think people to be good, I think that's a character trait which leaves you more vulnerable.
I agree, and I think that's exactly why her friend said that.
Yeah. And I think as far as like really what I keep going back to is what I think may have happened, and I could be totally off base, but, like meeting somebody, whether it be online or through some other type of group that she was a part of, I really think that that person could have played to that characteristic of her where she thinks, the best of everyone and could have
taken advantage
of that.
Agreed.
Because I'm sure there are tons of places between Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and anywhere in North Carolina where you could have gone hiking, where you could have taken a trip to. If she was just looking for like a hiking getaway, she could have went to any number of other places.
Yeah.
Why did she go here? She had to go here, most likely, to meet somebody.
Yeah, I agree. Outside of all that, there was some other information released in the episode in regards to some of the additional evidence that had been found at the scene where Judy's remains were located. Before, I had mentioned that Judy's red backpack was nowhere to be found, but there was a blue backpack discovered there. Authorities were working under the idea that this backpack did not belong to Judy and that it actually belonged to whoever killed her, which I find a little odd because why would the killer have, first of all, just left this behind if it was his or hers? What was in the backpack that could lead authorities to believe it wasn't Judy's? Because there were those previous comments in the press about how there were clothes and other things found with her remains. Were they then not actually in the backpack? Also, if you're of the belief that Judy left her life behind, then her not having her trusty red backpack wouldn't really surprise me, because it was definitely an obvious indicator of who she was and it stood out, so maybe she ditched it, but then that still doesn't make sense regarding why authorities would believe that the blue backpack wasn't hers.
Well, we talk about how killers take trophies.
Yeah.
And let's go along the lines of whoever she met down in North Carolina, she had met in, and again, I can't say this enough, maybe she never even went on the fucking internet. And I'm just totally pulling this out of my ass or whatever.
Yeah.
But let's go along the lines of she's in, a traveler's chat room, meets this person, starts talking to them, ends up in some type of email correspondence. Oh, here I am in Thailand. Picture of her in a red backpack. Here I am over here. Picture of her in a red backpack. Here I am here. Picture of her in a red backpack. If this person, chose her, convinced her to come down to North Carolina, made this plan where they were going to kill her, they could have went with their blue backpack, swapped it, taken hers as a trophy because that was an item that was so much akin to like her and her personality and who she was. It was always with her. The killer could have very well taken her backpack purposefully.
As a trophy, yeah. That's a great point to make. I agree with that. It wasn't something I was thinking about, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Now, there apparently was also an expensive pair of sunglasses found at the scene as well. The brand was said to be Bolay, which I guess at the time cost around $100 to $110 for a pair. And back in 1997, that's definitely a pretty penny for a pair of sunglasses. Authorities also stated that they believed those belonged to the killer as well. Her friends also seemed to corroborate this theory because they didn't think Judy would ever spend that much money on a pair of sunglasses. Any of this stuff found at the scene that authorities believed didn't belong to Judy just doesn't really make sense to me. Why would the killer have left anything behind? Obviously, you just gave me the whole thing with the backpack. I mean, I guess that could make sense. But if authorities just think like, oh, this was the killer's backpack and they're not thinking that it was swapped, why would they leave an entire backpack behind? And then with the sunglasses, I guess you could say that like maybe the killer just dropped them?
Yeah, I mean, if this was a whole planned event, I think that the killer probably cleaned up most of their evidence and leaving the glasses behind could have been a mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this person wasn't even into camping and found her in this traveling, again, still, I have no factual basis for this chat room thing, but maybe he found them and in order to provide her photos of him traveling and stuff, he went to like an REI and bought, top of the line clothing and equipment that travelers would use. And maybe, I don't know that Bolay name, but maybe that was just all part of the facade this person was putting on to make it seem like they were this person that they actually weren't.
Well, I think it's interesting that you keep saying he or a guy or whatever. I mean, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that she could have made like a really good girlfriend online and like had met somebody else that was like a kindred spirit to her who also really loved camping and hiking and being outdoors, and like because her husband wasn't into it like she was, now she has this new friend that she could be doing this with. And I mean, it can still go along the same lines though. It could be romantic, or it could be like maybe this person latched on and they were jealous or whatever. Maybe there was some sort of altercation. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that it could have been a female, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, I don't think that there's any evidence that would definitively prove otherwise, that it couldn't have been a male or a female.
Yeah.
It could go either way. It could be, you know, oh, my husband's the same way, we should go on a trip together.
Yeah.
If it was a girl,
Yep.
or if it was a guy, you know, making himself to be everything that she wanted in a partner.
Yep.
And that's how they got her to go down there and meet up with them.
Yeah, so I think it can go either way. I think it's definitely an interesting idea, but I think at least based on like where we are so far, it's definitely a possibility in terms of how she could have made her way down there, why she would have made her way down there, all of those things.
Yes, I agree. I would just say that law of averages and statistics and things say that men are more often the violent killers, more so than females. So if she was stabbed to death, I would lean more towards it being a guy that did it than a girl.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I don't know if I necessarily agree. I think
I mean, you can say that it could have happened either way.
Yeah.
But if you look at statistics.
No, I get that. I'm just saying, though, like in terms of who she was and.
Could go a million different ways, but I think that she met somebody somehow and they convinced her to go down there, and they were not the same person that they made themselves out to be.
Agreed. Not much new information was released after the Unsolved Mysteries episode aired, outside of an article or two that I found, but I honestly can't quite tell how reliable the information was because a lot of it didn't really match up with what I dug up from initial reporting on this case. So that kind of leads us into theories at this point, which we've kind of worked through a lot, but there's one big one that I haven't mentioned yet. So I'm going to start with that one as it's pretty in-depth, and then we can kind of work our way through the others after. So the first theory is that Judy Smith fell victim to a serial killer. Which I know, so many serial killers discussed in our episodes lately. But I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this and if you think this person could be connected to Judy's murder. So, Gary Michael Hilton, also known as the National Forest serial killer, is who some believe may have killed Judy. First and foremost, this guy is fucking scary looking, so I'm not quite sure if Judy would have willingly gone with him, like that friend was saying about her, you know, trusting people and being vulnerable, but either way. He was a serial killer who was active in North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. He was later convicted of several murders and sentenced to life in prison for one and received a death sentence for another. As of today, Gary Michael Hilton has 4 confirmed victims and several others that he may be linked to, but hasn't definitively been tied to. So clearly, right off the bat, this guy's a frickin' monster.
Clearly, but I'd like to know more as to why people are trying to connect him to Judy's death.
Okay, well, we're going to go over his 4 confirmed victims. So the first victim that he was actually convicted of killing was Cheryl Dunlap. Her murder took place in December of 2007. She was 46 years old and from the Crawfordville, Florida area. Hilton abducted and subsequently murdered her, and then a little less than 2 weeks after she went missing, a hunter found her decapitated body in the Apalachicola National Forest. It was reported that Cheryl was dismembered, with her head and hands removed post-mortem, but the ME was not able to definitively determine her cause of death, but he did state, quote, "It was likely to have been a violent crime," end quote. Meredith Emerson was also confirmed to be another victim of Gary Michael Hilton. She was from Georgia, and he kidnapped her in 2008 while she was hiking on Blood Mountain, which I believe is within the Chattahoochee National Forest. He held her for 4 days before he killed her, which I believe was by blunt force trauma to the head. He later ended up confessing and told police everything he did, and this guy is so fucking sick that he even said, according to the court documents on this case, quote, "You either kill them or you get caught," end quote.
I mean, I guess he's not lying.
No, he's not lying, but he's a fucking piece of shit.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
This is why I hate serial killers and anything involved in them, because they make me really fucking angry.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
So, he was later captured and tried for both Cheryl and Meredith's murders and was given the death penalty in Florida for Cheryl's and a life sentence in Georgia for Meredith's. From what I've gathered, I believe he was only given life in Georgia for Meredith's murder because he made a deal with authorities and led them to her body. He also apparently told a fellow inmate about things regarding Cheryl's case, and from what I can tell, he had absolutely no remorse for what he'd done and was just pissed off that he got caught. It was also mentioned that he supposedly spent a few days with her as well, so I think some of his MO has to do with him torturing his victims for days. Now, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, when Hilton was already in prison and on death row, he pled guilty and confessed to 2 additional murders, those of John and Irene Bryant. They were found in the Pisgah National Forest, which was the same place where Judy's body was found. The couple went missing in late October of 2007. That same Atlanta Journal-Constitution article stated that Hilton, quote, camped out for victims before he ambushed the Hendersonville couple, who were in their 80s, as they hiked the Pisgah National Forest in Transylvania County, end quote. Irene's body was found in November, roughly 2 to 3 weeks after the couple had gone missing, and it was discovered that she was killed from a blow to the head. Then, 3 months later, John's body was found, and he was killed by a gunshot wound to the head. So, just using these confirmed victims as a basis to try and compare to Judy's case, and if he could have been the one to kill her, there's a couple things I want to mention. In terms of similarities to Judy's case, first and foremost, the location where she was killed is a big one. She was found murdered in a national forest, and specifically the Pisgah National Forest, which is where 2 of Hilton's victims were killed, John and Irene Bryant. Then, if you consider cause of death, this guy was all over the map. He killed 2 of his victims by blunt force trauma, another with a gunshot wound to the head, and Cheryl's was undetermined. Based on what we know about Judy's case, she was potentially stabbed to death. That's definitely different in terms of cause of death, but I'm not sure if I'd rule him out entirely because he seems to use whatever means necessary in the moment. The main thing that makes me question his potential involvement is the time in which the crime occurred. Judy was killed in 1997, but almost all of Hilton's other confirmed victims were killed nearly a decade later. There are some others that I mentioned that he's been considered in, but only one that I've been able to find from the same time frame as Judy. The other thing I question has to do with his potential MO of torturing his victims for days before finally killing them. I don't believe there was really any sign of a struggle at the scene where Judy was found, so that makes me question his potential involvement here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually the one to refute a serial killer being involved.
Yeah.
But when you were saying like 2007, I was like, man, that's a decade difference between when Judy was killed and when most of his other victims were found.
Mm-hmm.
So to think that, you know, he would go 10 years without killing other people that he would be tied to.
Yeah.
Makes it, you know, questionable in my mind.
I agree.
Especially when it seems like he's pretty sloppy about it. He kills them by whatever means possible.
Mm-hmm.
So if Irene was killed, you know, blunt force trauma, her husband was shot, Cheryl was killed somehow and then disarticulated later.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, there's really no rhyme or reason to how he operates. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So to think that nothing else would be tied to him for 10 years between when he seemed to be active and when Judy was killed just doesn't really jive for me.
Yeah, and there's one other thing about him, too, that I think is pretty big, at least to me, and that's that he seems like the type who would admit to the crimes he's committed. He later confessed and pled guilty in John and Irene's cases, so what makes you think that he wouldn't have been forthcoming about others? He also told authorities everything they wanted to know when he made a deal in Meredith's case. And also, I do just want to mention, he has recently attempted to get his death sentence overturned, like as recently as 2021, but every single time his dumbass gets turned down, and I truly don't know why he would even try if he's already pled guilty to all these other crimes, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I think that sometimes these whacked out people want to do it just for clout, you know? So once they already know that they're in prison for life or they have the death sentence, you know, on the table, it's like, yeah, I think some of them would just admit to all of it. But that's like the confession killer, right?
Yeah, who is confessing a shit he didn't do.
Right, exactly. So can you really believe everything they say? Whatever.
Yeah.
But I just think the whole time frame and the MO and all that just doesn't work for me without, you know, some more significant evidence tying him to
Judy's specifically.
Death,
yeah. There was never any evidence that I could find that was actually linked with him to her murder. So it could just be like an odd coincidence that he had some connections to the area where she was found.
I wouldn't say that by ruling him out, you rule out like all serial killers. I know that we don't like to necessarily harp on that topic, but
It's just because it makes me so fucking angry.
I
like,
get
look
it.
at me.
Yeah, no. I hear you. And it's, but with deaths and murders, it's like, that's what these people do. That's why they're attached to it. So we will reach the inevitable case where it's unsolved and it actually turns out that it was a serial killer involved. And if you're talking about, somebody that could have planned this whole thing via meeting her, however, lying about who they were, luring her down there, getting her to go camping with them, and then killing her, burying her body. It's like, that sounds like something a fucking serial killer would do, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely.
So, I don't think it's this Hilton guy, but
you can't rule out the idea of a serial killer in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so outside of that, there are a couple other theories that have been discussed, most of which we've gone over so far, but some people believe she could have been hurt, like in that comment about the blow to the head that can cause amnesia, or she could have had an accident where she had a head injury, and then she lost her memory and somehow wound up in North Carolina. What are your thoughts on this idea, John? Do you think that she could have just lost her memory and then somehow made it to a place she probably would have frequented down in North Carolina?
If you saw my face, you would know.
I wasn't looking.
No. No, I just have that pout on, shaking my head. No, I don't think so. I mean, outside of the small chance of, say, somebody gets amnesia, who knows what they forget, what they remember. If traveling was this thing that was deeply embedded in her, and she forgot everything else, but she still had a love for traveling, maybe she had gotten, a bump on the head, was amnesic, and then went on this weird travel excursion.
It's just so strange, though.
Yeah, I think it is very low on my list of possibilities, but
agreed.
Can't totally rule it out, I guess. I still have a more steadfast belief on what I think occurred.
I agree. Another is obviously one that we've gone over a lot, which is that she planned her own disappearance. After planning the whole vanishing act, though, like John and I were talking about a bazillion times in this episode, did she plan to specifically meet someone down in North Carolina and somebody lured her down there? Or could it be along the lines of, she planned her own disappearance, she went down to this area, and then she just unfortunately stumbled upon a dangerous stranger?
No, I think that, like you had said before, the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Agreed.
I think that she planned to go down to North Carolina, potentially to meet up with somebody, and then things went awry. I don't think that she was necessarily trying to run away from her life, but I do believe there was some type of rendezvous with somebody, and then that person or people connected to that person that she thought she was meeting up with ended up killing her. And I think that's why her kids didn't know about anything. I think that this was some secret type of travel just to, try to enjoy herself or to meet up with this person. And then once this excursion was over, she would go back to Massachusetts, reassess her life and her marriage, fill her kids in on what was going on, and take it from there.
I'm definitely on board with that theory, but I did just want to add in the last one that has been discussed, and obviously it's one we have already voiced our opinion on that we don't agree with, but that is that some people believe Jeff did it or was involved in it in some way, shape, or form. But again, I really feel like that's a stretch in regards to physically doing it. There's no way he drove 10 hours over 600 miles from Philly to then kill her in this national forest that he wouldn't be able to hike physically and then get back to his conference. I mean, none of it makes sense. And Judy's children held the same sentiment. They absolutely did not believe that Jeff did anything to harm their mother. Craig, Judy's son, told the Philadelphia Inquirer, quote, "I want the police to ask questions, any questions they can think of. That means they're still investigating, and I don't want them to stop. But they're wrong if they think Jeff did anything to my mother. He wouldn't, not in a million years," end quote. And unfortunately, Jeff passed away in 2005, but from what I can tell, it does seem as though he was ruled out as a suspect in her disappearance and subsequent murder. So I don't think authorities, however far into this investigation they are now, wherever they're looking, I don't think it's at Jeff anymore.
Yeah, and I think that my whole reasoning behind ruling him out is lack of motive. He seems to be the one that had most of the power in the marriage.
Yeah.
He had Judy sign a prenup. They were together for 10 years. They just married after 5 months. He wasn't the one that seemed to be apprehensive. Outside of his physical ability to take part in this, I think that it would be far too elaborate of a scheme to pay somebody to abduct his wife, bring her 600 miles away, bring her out to this campsite, stage a campsite, kill her, bury her body, get out of there. I think there are way too many things that rule him out, and lack of motive is the biggest one.
I completely agree, and I think motive is huge, and I think people kind of almost gloss over that sometimes, where it's like, sure, maybe you could try and fit the pieces of, the logistics of a crime being able to occur, but it's like, if you can't figure out the why...
Or have physical evidence tying this person to it, and then find out the why after.
Yes, exactly. Like, it goes back to Roland and Maram Hanel that we covered last week, or 2 weeks ago at this point now. It seems like they're so stuck and they're stalled in that investigation because they can't figure out the why.
Right.
And I feel like of the who, what, when, where, and why questions that you are asking, why feels like the most important.
Yeah, why is the one that turns people you're interviewing into persons of interest, and then potentially suspects.
Yep, I agree. So, now that we've worked through all the theories, let's dive into the questions we're left with.
A couple things that I had jotted down that we really didn't get into yet is having to do with like surveillance footage. Can we track her movements after she was last seen in Philadelphia?
Yep.
Did she go to the Liberty Bell? Did she go to Independence Hall? Was she seen at a bus terminal somewhere? Where was the last time that we have actually like tracked her down, and the very last time that she was seen, where was that and at what time?
Yep. Like, did she use her credit card to pay for...
Well, we know that she didn't use her credit card because they didn't have any charges.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if it's like during the day. I don't know if they were looking at credit card charges after she had already been officially missing.
Sure.
Or like, did you find a credit card transaction at noon on April 10th when nobody knew she was missing? Exactly. Yeah. So could you put her in the city that way?
Yeah. So surveillance is my big thing. Can we track down like her movements to the very last time that we saw her, or the very last time that anyone saw her in Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had one, which was, did anyone ever find her red backpack? Like, if obviously we're kind of thinking along the lines that like someone might have taken that as a trophy, but what if they didn't? Did somebody find it? And maybe that's something that police haven't released, and, say they found it in freaking Mexico or like something crazy, you know what I mean?
Or maybe they found it at the scene of the crime and it has DNA evidence on it and they don't want to release that?
Yeah, that's absolutely possible as well. So I'm very curious about the red backpack, if it's ever been found, if anybody ever found anything like it and brought it to authorities or anything like that.
Sure. To go along kind of with my surveillance portion, I guess it's another type of surveillance if you think of it that way, would be internet and phone logs.
Yep.
Did she make phone calls to anybody from the North Carolina area? Did she have any connection that way? Did the FBI or any state authorities look through her email address? Did she have any correspondence with somebody that she could have been having some type of affair with, or some type of friendship at a bare minimum with that she could have traveled to go meet up with?
Yep.
I think that's stuff that should be fairly easy to get a hold of if it was, ever there.
Yeah. A question that I had in regards to just the travel to North Carolina in general is, why is she making this in-between trip to Philadelphia? Like, what was the point of going there to then just leave within pretty much like 12 hours of when she arrived there? And I think to just go along with that, like, as much as we've talked it out throughout, these 2 episodes, I just really would want to know, like, was her ID left on purpose? Or could it go along the lines of like a psychological issue, which, I mean, I don't think that's completely out of the realm of possibility, but just knowing if it was a purposeful act or not.
I think it was.
I mean, I think so too, but I think like you were just asking about the phone records or the computer records, if we knew that there was definitively a relationship there or something she was planning to do, then I think you can kind of answer the question of like, okay, she definitely left that behind on purpose because of this. But if none of that's ever been found, I don't know then.
Well, I mean, we never know what type of information is being kept a secret as part of the investigation, because maybe they're still trying to track down this other person. If there were emails or phone records, maybe they're still trying to track down this other person.
Yeah.
So maybe that has been found and it just hasn't been released because it's such a pivotal piece of info.
Definitely possible. I think the biggest question was one that we asked earlier, and that's, how on earth, though, did she get to North Carolina?
I'm thinking a bus.
You think?
Yeah, I think so. You could easily get to a bus terminal, pay cash for the ticket, hop on, and just go.
But no sightings ever.
Yeah, well.
I wonder if any of those additional sightings that were mentioned from the North Carolina area were of her on like a bus or a taxi or a train, or
maybe she rented a car and drove it herself.
Maybe. It was said, though, that she did have some cash on her. She had her credit card, but obviously she hadn't used it, at least after she went missing. But there was like more cash left in the hotel room than she had on her person, which was interesting.
Well, that was found on her person.
Yes, that like Jeff knew that she took from like however much cash they had on her.
Right. I think the last question that I have has to do with cause of death.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I would just like, a more nailed down cause of death.
Agreed.
Which who knows if that would even help in the investigation. I mean, in order to identify this person, I think it's really phone or internet records if this was somebody that she had been corresponding with.
Yep.
Any sightings.
That's what I was going to say, yep.
With another individual down in North Carolina or anywhere in between Philadelphia and North Carolina.
Or if anybody that was in the Pisgah National Forest, if they had seen someone that was just like acting weird or whatever.
Right. There could be something there that you would hope somebody would have came forward with sooner if there really was, but that's something you kind of hope for as far as identifying, if not her killer, the last person that she was seen with.
Yeah, I agree completely. This obviously was a very long, very in-depth case, and there's clearly a lot of questions that we're all left with. So we would love to hear from you guys. If you want to comment on social media, comment on YouTube, wherever. We would really love to start a discussion with you guys about this case, and we want to know what you're thinking and if there's anything we missed or if there's good points to add.
Right. If you have questions that we haven't asked that maybe we can look into to help you figure out, or if there are questions that we've asked that you already know the answer to, definitely let us know.
Definitely. So, if you have any information, no matter how small, that can help identify Judy Smith's killer, please contact the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department at 828-250-4503. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.